Hey, Dr. Jon Finn here. Welcome to the Habit Mechanic podcast. Right now, you can get my new best-selling book, Train Your Brain for the AI Revolution, at tougherminds.co.uk. The digital book, audiobook, and physical book are all available at a special price that you won't find anywhere else.
Welcome to the Habit Mechanic podcast. To help you finish this year strongly and get ready for a successful 2024, we're re-releasing every podcast we've recorded so far that takes a deep dive into the Habit Mechanic book. The episode's coming up in a few moments. Remember, if you want to get your business off to a great start in January, get in touch to discuss how our Habit Mechanic keynotes or workshops can equip your people with practical skills that help them build super habits in 5 minutes. Or if you want to earn £100,000 per year working part-time by launching your own coaching business, we guarantee to help you do that in just 13 hours. Get in touch with us today to learn more about becoming a certified habit mechanic coach who can transform people's lives and is recognized as a world leader in the field. For more details, contact us via the website. The link is in the podcast notes. Or, if you want to feel better and do better every day, download the Habit Mechanic University app from your app store. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, Habit Mechanics. This is our first ever live streamed podcast, which is really exciting. If you can't see us in the live stream, you're going to be listening to us, no doubt, wherever you normally listen to your podcasts. Hope you've had a fantastic week. I'm really excited about today because we're going to take a deep dive into the language that is the backbone of the habit mechanic approach. So we're going to look at chapters 3 and part of chapter 27. The chapter 3 is the habit mechanic language and tools, and chapter 27 focuses on, it's the first leadership chapter, so it introduces what we call the chief habit mechanic language and tools. So I'm excited about Andrew. How about you?
Yeah, hello again, John. Yeah, certainly am. It is going to be a fascinating podcast looking at this idea of a shared language. As you say, later in the podcast, we are talking about leadership. And also, I'd like to ask you about your recent speaking engagement about alongside some high profile sporting figures. So we'll get to that later. I think a former Premier League football manager and an Olympic gold medalist were involved in a recent engagement. So that'll be fascinating, I'm sure. And I look forward to speaking about that with you. Starting with chapter 3, then the habit mechanic language and tools. The first thing that I wanted to ask you, John, is why is it important that you create this shared language, this shared understanding for people embarking on a journey to try and do better and feel better?
Yeah, so we've in recent episodes talked about the 9 action factors. One of those is called community, knowledge and skills. Another is called personal knowledge and skills. Human beings are hugely complex. Our brain, I think people say it's the most complicated thing in the known world. And in order to understand how to navigate it, it's really helpful to have a language. So, I've experienced, for example, where you go into an organization and lots of people are talking about confidence, or motivation, or leadership. And when you dig into it, they might all mean slightly different things by those quite common words that we would use. So part of my journey's been to make it easier for people to understand individually and collectively, well, what does confidence actually mean? And therefore we can start to think about how we could improve it. So what emerged over the last literally 20 years is a whole set of language to explain core themes within the habit mechanic approach, and also to explain the core tools, both the planning tools and the reflection tools. And I think it just makes it simpler. You see in the Habit Mechanic University app, people just using now in a very familiar way, very simple language that is actually about really complicated things. And I think that, if you're going to study anything, if you're going to learn about anything in a detailed way, whether you want to learn to become a car mechanic or an accountant or a soccer coach or a school teacher or a lawyer or whatever, there is language that you have to learn ultimately. We are more complicated than any of those other professions, human beings. So it makes a lot of sense that we would have a language to explain ourselves that's not only easy to remember and share, but also it is based on actually what's going on inside us, but it's framed positively, so it actually helps us to do better.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, as you say, Jon. And the great thing about the Habit Mechanic book is it does set out all this language and all these terms and tools, and you're able to refer back to them. So it becomes a resource for life, a resource for the journey you're on to be your best and to feel better. So I'm sure people will get into the habit of referring back to these tools and applying them and gaining that understanding, that shared understanding that you talk about. Now, as you say, Jon, the language is in chapter 3 is divided into 3 sections broadly: core language, tools for self-reflection, and tools for planning to be your best and to improve. I think if we start at the first on the first page and the core language, I'd like to ask you about some of these and as you say, take a deep dive into them. So if we can, under the heading of core language, let's start with me power conditioning. Tell us more, Jon, please.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of where the term me power came from, and you can probably remember some of this as well. I certainly remember developing some of the icons around it and the imagery. I think the idea of me power was just very simply trying to help people to understand that they have a lot of internal potential, and if we can understand how our brain works, we can start to do some small, simple, practical things to think and feel and do a little bit better. Then that goes an awful long way to feeling our happiness and our performance. And I think that one of the most important but non-obvious things about the mechanic approach and about human beings generally is that we're thinking all the time, and most of us don't even recognize that we're talking to ourselves all the time. If you're talking to yourself right now, just notice how you said to yourself, I'm not speaking to myself. It's always there. So ultimately, we have a lot more control over what we think and do than we've been led to believe. And when we start to understand that we can actually even control the level to how we think, then that's the first step to doing better. If you think about the T plan, for example, which is the tool in chapter 1 of the book, which we'll come on to, the first question in that is, how well did I do my best to be at my best? So me power conditioning is about working on yourself, conditioning yourself. People are most familiar with that term, conditioning, in terms of the physical elements. And I remember reading a paper when I was an academic that was about periodizing mental skills training. So mental skills training is about using thinking, training yourself to think in simple terms in a more helpful, powerful way. And I started to see people drawing parallels between mental skills training and physical training. And that's probably where I started to think about this idea of, conditioning, which is more of a physical term.
Yeah, I think that's a useful parallel to draw, Jon. As you say, athletes will engage in a period of hard work, and then maybe alternate that with some work that's easier. And it's a very useful idea, I think, when you think about training for the long term and preparing and going on a journey. Okay, thanks for that, John. Connected to that, then, I think, is the term that we see under core language, HUE, horribly unhelpful emotions. This idea of thinking all the time and can't always be helpful thinking, can it?
Yeah, so horribly unhelpful emotions. I distinctly remember creating this idea, and I remember the first time we used it was in some schools in London called the Quintin Kynaston schools, which are out down by Lords cricket club, but they're a real. It was a school that was in special measure at the time when we went in. And I remember our head of education being a bit nervous about using this new language about HUE and horribly unhelpful emotions. But the kids just loved it. And within minutes, they were repeating this back. And I think that I've been compelled by a long time that emotions drive everything that we do. The whole backbone of my PhD is emotional regulation, and the hypothesis, if we can get better at that, everything in life gets easier. So I just wanted to give it a really friendly label. And I think the idea of a character is just really brings something quite intangible to life. And there is something about the name Hugh. I know a few Hughs are all a bit different, but people seem to connect to this idea of Hugh being a little bit of a maybe grumpy or a bit irritable. So yeah, it's just been, you create these ideas and you don't know how they're going to land, but this one has landed particularly well for some reason. I'm not sure why. But yeah, that's what HUE means, horribly unhelpful emotions, and it's driving everything that we do. It runs the lighthouse brain, which we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, it's funny you say the lighthouse brain. That was going to be my next question, my next term to discuss with you, John. Of course, HUE is a key method for you to help people understand about their brains and how they're thinking and how they're talking to themselves. The lighthouse brain connects to that also.
Yeah, so the lighthouse brain is the simplest way that and it might also be helpful, Andrew, when you introduce these terms, or I can do this as well, I suppose, is just say where they are in the book. The lighthouse brain is actually chapter 10 of the book, and it's where we first start to introduce how the brain works. We have 3 brain models, or 3 ways of explaining how the brain works. They start from simple, medium, to the actual reality of how we understand brains work. The lighthouse brain is the simplest way to explain it. That is our newest explanation of how brains work. It's the idea that imagine you've got a lighthouse in your brain, the spotlight's always on. There are 2 characters that live in the lighthouse. One is Hugh, horribly unhelpful emotions. Hugh's job is to run the beam of light. He spends all day searching the past, the present, and the future for worries, threats, problems. It's looking into the future to predict what might go wrong. It's dwelling on things that might have happened in the past. It's looking at the immediate future as well. And the other character is Wilhelmina Power, or Willpower. That lives in the lighthouse. It's his library. It's interested in learning and helping you to be at your best. And when Hugh spots something troubling, it calls up to Wilhelmina Power, or Willpower, and makes it aware we've got a problem. That's like when you become consciously aware of a worrying thought in your head, or would be a loud bang or something in your environment. And then we have something called the willpower mentoring process, where Will goes down and it starts to work with Hugh to actually work out, what is this problem? Is it a real problem? Is it an imaginary problem? If it's a real problem, how do we start to deal with it? And if your brain's working well, then you're able to use your willpower to calm down Hugh and to train it and educate it to get better at responding to some of the challenging things that it's noticing. And fundamentally, that's about something we call implicit emotional regulation. So that's the lighthouse brain.
Two for the price of one there, Jon. Yeah, Hugh, you went straight into will or Wilhelmina power, and yeah, they are related, as you say, and people can read more in chapter 10 about both of those things. But just to recap then, it's clear to me as we talk through this then that the language you've evolved, you've developed and codified, it's obviously in this case, it's creating characters, it's personifying these concepts to make them easy to apply and understand.
Yeah, so we understand that if I'm an expert in anything, it's learning, because that's my job. I'm trying to help people to learn how to think more effectively. So we take learning very seriously, and we go to the nth degree to make it as easy as possible for people to learn. We know that humans have episodic memories, and we know that that type of memory is very friendly for learning stories. So stories are really key to Homo sapiens. So if we can turn things into story format, they become easier to learn, to remember, but most importantly, to use in your everyday life, so that when you become worried and overly stressed and you've got lots of unhelpful thoughts, unwanted thoughts, you've got a better way of, instead of having to understand all the different academic brain labels that might be interesting but not that useful, you've got a simple but powerful way of understanding how your brain actually works. But there are some serious things in there as well. I get asked about willpower often. Is willpower just a waste of time? Is it futile? Like a lot of topics in popular culture, they get polarized. Something's either great or it's useless. So willpower either explains everything about why we're able to do things, do difficult things, or it explains nothing. Willpower is real. It lives in the prefrontal cortex. Some scientists call it, or that it's connected to what we call self-control, others emotional regulation. There are some different terms for it. But it is a limited resource. We only have so much of it. So what we need to do is to use willpower, that limited resource that we have. We need to make sure that we optimize a limited resource with good sleep, good diet, good exercise. But then we bring in insights from behavioral science and habit science to make it easier for us to habitualize the things that willpower can kind of kickstart, the thinking behaviors or the habits that we'd like to develop. Willpower helps us to kickstart those things, but then we've got to use the behavioral science and the habit science in the form of the 9 action factor model to help us to do that. Yeah,
okay, fantastic. Moving on then, Jon, two terms which again in the same way as Hugh and Will or Wilhelmina power are interrelated. These two are interrelated too, and you can find more in chapter 11. And again, people might recognize what I'm about to say in some other literature they've read, but it's very important to point out the way the habit mechanic explains and defines this term and created this specific term. In fact, it is a unique understanding and a unique, I suppose, deployment of it. The ape brain, and related to it, we'll come on to it, the hack brain. So, Jon, if we start with the ape brain.
Yeah, so the ape brain is an acronym. But it's a clever acronym because it's pointing towards the fact that human beings are great apes. That's our lineage. When you look at the brain and what it's designed to do, for me, there were 3 salient things that I thought were important to try to convey to people. Number 1 was that our brain is the survival, or let's just start with, ground zero. Our brain is about survival. That's what it's designed to do. And you can break that into 3 core things. One is it's designed to help you to stay alive. So it's got some real basic functionality to help you to breathe and for your heart to beat, etc. But also it's making you aware of the loud bangs, of the person that looks a little bit suspicious that's walking towards you. So it's helping you to stay alive. The second thing, and it's connected to the first thing, but it is distinct, is that it's interested in your social status, or in other words, how you're perceived by important people in your life. So for most of humans are not the biggest, fastest, strongest animal on the planet. Our unique survival advantage is working intelligently in teams. So if you want to improve your chances of surviving and in fact passing your genes on, other people need to like you. So our brain is hardwired to be aware of that. In fact, the parts of your brain that are telling you about what important people think about you, your social status, are hardwired into the parts of your brain that tell you if you're thirsty or you're hungry. That's how fundamental it is. So we've got the alive, the perceived, and then the E is energy. So our brain's number one operating rule is to save energy. And sometimes people get confused. They say, I thought the number one operating rule was survival. Well, no, our brain's designed for survival. You can't survive if you don't have any energy. That's sort of the most basic limiting factor. Think of your car. Your car can't go anywhere if it doesn't have any petrol in it. Your body can't function if you don't have energy inside it. And for most of our existence, energy has been a scarce resource. So we are wired to conserve energy at all costs. That's why we habitualize everything, because habits are the most energy efficient ways to do things. That's also why supermarket shelves emptied in the pandemic, because people panicked and thought there was going to be a lack of energy resources. Yeah, so that's the 8 brain: alive, perceived, energy brain.
Yeah, okay. And then, as we say, connected to that, the hack brain, the helpful attention control brain. I've started defining it there for you, Jon.
Yeah, so the helpful attention control brain is trying to point a bit more academically, a bit more scientifically to what the prefrontal cortex is really useful for, which is helping us to get our attention back onto what's the most helpful for us. So willpower lives and runs the hack brain. Hugh lives in and runs the 8 brain. But we also just like the term hack, in the sense of to hack into something, to hack into the system. So that's where, some of that wordplay comes from. And we were just able to actually fit in something very meaningful into that. Helpful is really important as well, because people talk about positive and negative, which I think is oversimplistic. Something that's really positive, for example, I like donuts, so I ate 3 donuts this morning, could be really unhelpful for my weight goals. Something that's really positive, something that's really negative, like my boss gave me a bit of a telling off today because, my work isn't up to scratch. That might be quite helpful, because that I needed a kick up the backside to get me back on track. So it's about helpful attention control. We are paying attention all of the time, and sometimes we're paying attention to things that are helping us to be at our best. Sometimes we're just paying attention to things that are not helping us to be at our best or unhelpful. And that's where we have the barcode to visualize a 24-hour period. The black lines in the book are unhelpful parts of the day when we're doing and thinking things that are not helping us to be at our best. The white lines are times in the day when we're thinking and doing things that are helping us to be at our best.
Yeah, and of course, it's important to point out that all these terms are nicely set out for people in the Habit Mechanic book, and specifically these 2 terms you can read more about them in chapter 11, but they're all set out for people in chapter 3, the Habit Mechanic language and tools. We're looking at the core language just at the moment. There's over 2 pages of these terms, but I would advise people not to be intimidated, because the accessibility and the clarity there is so helpful. But it does nevertheless show the comprehensive nature of what the habit mechanic can do for people. And understanding these terms is a fantastic way, I think, to start your journey to feel better and be better. I'm going to ask you a few more terms within the core language section, Jon. We probably haven't got time on this podcast to do them all, but again, two interrelated ones. When it comes to people, as I say, trying to be better, trying to feel better, and focusing on that development. Chapter 14 for these two: hedonism and eudaimonia.
Yeah, so
I suppose people might think they know what hedonism is initially.
yeah, and that, you know, I'm sure they're in the right ballpark as they think of what it means for them. The question of what is happiness, what do you need to be happy? I saw someone posted it on LinkedIn. Well, what you really need to be happy is freedom. And I was thinking about what that means in the context of what I understand, but I think happiness is a three-part equation, and the first part is getting your brain working well, which means good sleep, good diet, good exercise, good social connectivity. The second part of the equation is hedonism, that is letting your hair down, having some fun, giving into short-term gratification now and again. That's easier to do than ever before because of the world that we live in. We can buy pretty much anything that we want, or we can access that. We can, check in with social media. Any foods that we want are available to us. We can watch TV 24/7, etc. So it's easier than ever to have hedonic experiences. The third part of the equation is eudaimonia, which really at the heart of it is delaying short-term gratification so that you can make personal progress, so that you do what I call a high charge work, and you delay the temptation to give in to the short-term gratification thing, and you keep persisting so that you actually grow and you learn and you feel better about yourself. So being happy for me is a balance across all three of those things. But the challenge we face is that it's easier than ever to do hedonic things. That disrupts good brain function. So it disrupts good sleep, good diet, good exercise. And it also makes it harder to make progress on meaningful activities that are often mentally challenging. And because our brain's designed to save energy, it resists going there. So that's what those terms mean. So it's trying to dig into, as much scientific insights as we can to build really strong foundations for what we're helping people to do. So I just didn't want to say, well, happiness is important. I wanted to say, well, what actually is happiness, and what are the subcomponent parts of that? And I'm pretty compelled by that equation. It doesn't, it's one of those that when you go back to it time and again, it still makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's what they mean.
Yeah, and chapter 14 is the place where you can read more about hedonism and eudaimonia. As I say, we won't do them all, Jon, in the core language section because of the length, but you just mentioned something there which connects to a term I wanted to ask you about. You talked about high charge, and this relates to the core language, the core term brain states, which is discussed in detail in chapter 25, but listed in chapter 3 as we're talking about today. So please do tell us what you mean by this term brain states.
Yeah, so we like to think of the brain as being like a battery. It's only got so much charge in any 24-hour period, and there are 3 states it can operate in. One state is recharge, one is medium charge, one is high charge. In the recharge can be sleep or non-sleep. In the medium charge brain state, we do our easy work that we call freezing ice cubes. In the high charge brain state, which is a limited resource, we can only have so much of it each day. we build our ice sculptures, which is our mentally complex and challenging work. And the key is to get the optimal balance between those brain states every day. So the optimal balance is a bit like a pyramid structure, with the recharge at the bottom, the medium charge in the middle, and the high charge, which is the scarcest resource, at the top. So I'm setting up my day, my work days, so that I can do between 4 to 5 hours of high charge work every day. And the core tool that we use to help people to put all that together is called the willpower story, which is one of the main tools in chapter 25. So that's what we mean by high charge brain state and brain states more generally.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful metaphor, if you like, the idea of the brain as a battery. I certainly find that extremely applicable and accessible when you're thinking about your day and trying to be your best at any point during the day. It really is a great tool and a great way of thinking about it. Final one then, in the core language section, if we may, and we're going back up the list actually, but that doesn't matter. Chapter 23 for this one. I think it's something that I've seen it have a really significant impact with people. You use the term the house of confidence.
Yeah, so we created the term the house of confidence, again, just trying to make something that's quite intangible much more tangible. So confidence is a term that's used on a daily basis by a lot of people, but what does it actually mean? How can you make that term more helpful? So the house metaphor has a few different components, but we know that confidence has two components as a construct. It isn't one thing, but people seem to talk about one or other of those constructs interchangeably with confidence, which is inaccurate, and also it's going to lead to you building poor confidence. So confidence has two parts. One is belief, which is called self-esteem, and the other part is evidence, which is called self-efficacy. So the house works quite well because you can think of the bricks as your evidence as to why you're good at something. So let's just say maths as an example. So you might have one brick for addition, one brick for subtraction, one brick for division, one brick for long division, one brick for knowing your times tables, and so on and so forth. Equally, you might have bricks you'd have bricks for reading and writing and listening as well, because if you can't do those things, you're not going to learn math either. So you've got the evidence, and then the house as an entire structure is your belief. And if you think of it like this, you build much more robust confidence. Also, in the original House of Confidence visual and how we explain it is the 3-to-1 mechanism, which is based on Barbara Fredrickson's work. The idea that if you're flourishing in life, if you're doing really well, you're processing at least 3 positives to every 1 negative, which I think of as a helpful way of thinking. That's a minimal ratio. Sometimes you need up to 11 positives to every 1 negative, but we use that House of Confidence visual to demonstrate that.
Yeah,
that's the House of Confidence.
Yeah, when you see that visual, it really does make it even more digestible, and that's a great explanation. But certainly, when it's used in tandem with a visual, I've seen people really come alive almost, and gain an understanding of confidence and building confidence that's so applicable and useful for them. Well, Jon, thanks for that, taking us through those pieces of core language that people can find in chapter 3 of the Habit Mechanic, which focuses on habit mechanic language and tools. We're going to move on now to the language that relates to self-reflection, the tools for self-reflection section. And the first one, I think it is the first term listed here, but I think it's most appropriate to start with the ape brain test. We've talked about the ape brain just recently, but this is the ape brain test.
Yeah, so this is our most basic, what we call habit metric. I've spoken a lot recently about why psychometrics don't work, why they're outdated, why I'd argue they're more damaging than good. They do more damage than good. So our our simplest way to get people thinking about their habits is the 8-brain test, which is literally being used by, easily, I'd say, tens of thousands of people now, because it's one of the first things that we used to do with people. And it's just a really simple way of switching on your prefrontal cortex and thinking about yourself in a way that you wouldn't normally think about yourself. I think that's in chapter 12 of the book. Is that right, Andrew? Yeah. So it's just a way for people to start making sense of some of the things they've been reading so far in the book in their own lives. So yeah, that's the 8-brain test.
Okay, and then connected to that, you have a more developed reflective tool to help people go further than that, and it is the second one on the list, but I think it's useful to connect the two together. The in-depth habits reflection. Again, well, that's in chapter 17.
Yeah, so what we've learned is that the way that we ask people to think about themselves via our habit metrics can be quite difficult, because we're just not designed to think about ourselves in these ways. So right now we can see each other quite clearly, Andrew, almost in 2020 vision, even though we're in an online meeting. Our ability to see ourselves in the same way is very, very limited. So our brains are just not wired to be good at thinking about ourselves and how we're doing. So if you get a rumble in your stomach, what is it? Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I got an upset tummy? Am I sad? We're just not good at reading ourselves. So what we're doing with these habit metrics is making it easier for people to do that using these tried and tested frameworks. So the in-depth habit reflection builds on the 8-brain test. It gets you thinking again. You don't just do these self-assessments once. They're evergreen self-development tools. And then what builds on the in-depth habits reflection is the helpful habits reflection. And I always start my coaching work using those tools to get people thinking about themselves. Very soon they'll be available in the app as well, actually, so you can store your data. Just making it easy to see the progress that you're making on different areas. But yeah, they're designed to help make it easy to switch on your prefrontal cortex, but to think about yourself in a structured and systematic way that allows you to recognize the helpful things that you're doing, but also some of the unhelpful things, so you can start to target one tiny unhelpful thing and build a better habit in that area. And another way we would explain that is it helps you to identify your destructive habits and start to destroy them, and start to uncover your super habits and start to build them.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out, John, the Habit Mechanic University app is free to download in the first instance from the App Store, and you can also get it on Google Play as well. Very well worthwhile doing. So you've talked us through the first three self-reflection tools then. Let's just carry on and pick up after the 8-brain test, the in-depth habits reflection and the helpful habits reflection. The next exercise that you're referring to is how Hugh hinders change. More details can be found in chapter 20, but how Hugh hinders change, John, explain that one for us, please.
Yeah, so this is another habit metric, and it's making us consider some of the automatic and ingrained biases and belief systems that Hugh might throw at us to derail our efforts to make positive change. So we found that if you can be aware of how Hugh might get in your way before it actually gets in your way, you've got a better chance of dealing with it. So we know that changing behavior, changing our habits can be really difficult. So that self-assessment is just giving you the very best chance of being aware of how Hugh might derail you, which may have been a more linguistically creative way to name that, the self-assessment. So that's how Hugh hinders change.
Okay, thanks, John. Last two then in the self-reflection tools section. People, as they go on the journey to be their best and perform better, will often, I suppose, establish some skills and develop to some extent, but then in their lives, in their work, they come under pressure. And this is a tool to help performance under pressure, the Performance Hack Plan.
Yeah, so chapter 24 is where we take the deep dive into how to perform under pressure. So the Performance Hack Plan brings all the big ideas together that we know are really important for getting good at performing under pressure. So my background in sports psychology gave me a huge interest in getting better at performing under pressure. I went further than most by creating my own physical performing under pressure training aid called the pre-shot training system. Yeah, so the performance hack plan is just making it really easy to understand what you're doing well to give yourself the very best chance of performing under pressure, whether that's a presentation or hitting a golf ball or anything else that you want to get better at under pressure. And then it's also allowing you to identify some areas that you could do better, some areas that you could improve.
Okay, and the final term then, you've talked about the importance of learning and the pivotal nature and need for it in this self-development journey. The Learning Strengths Plan, explain that one for us, please. Chapter 26 is where you can find more about that, by the way.
Yeah, so one of the core language is 10 intelligence factors. So very early when I started to work in education, I would hear people saying, little Jimmy just can't learn. To which I'd fall off my chair, thinking, what are you talking about? You can't. Humans are designed to learn. Everything we can do, we've learned to do. So one of the things I wanted to do was really break down how learning happens, and what emerged out of that is the 10 intelligence factors, which I really unpack in chapter 5, but then go into even more detail in chapter 26. We can all learn. We're all doing it all of the time. Already in this podcast, you've learned some language that you may have not been familiar with before. But there are really smart, efficient, and effective ways to learn. And there are ways to practice that are not very effective. So the Learning Strengths Plan allows you to put into practice the learning insights that we share and think about how you're giving yourself the best chance or not to optimize the time that you're spending doing formal learning. So including things like activation levels and how you're repeating things or not, etc. But it's just a really important part of writing the Habit Mechanic book and creating the approach is making sure that you don't just give people the knowledge and some skills, that you start to give them a pathway to developing better habits. So that's what the Learning Strengths Plan is for. And of course, fundamentally as habit mechanics, we're all learning to get better at building better habits, so although learning might not feel immediately that important for you, if you want to be healthier and happier and at your best more often, it is the main conduit for that, because you need to learn how to change your behavior ultimately.
Yeah, when you put it like that, John, you can certainly see the absolute pivotal nature of it, and as you say, it's something people might not have immediately associated with this, but yeah, absolutely, you can see that. Well, thanks so far for taking us through some of the terms in the core language section of chapter 3, and also the tools for self-reflection. The final section then is the planning tools. These are tools to help people plan to be their best and plan to perform well. And if we can take the first two together, I think it's relevant. They as I believe, bookend the day potentially for people, the start and the end of the day, the daily T plan and the daily 3-to-1 reflection. Please give us your insight into those, Jon.
Yeah, so the daily T plan is chapter 1 of the book, which is, if you go into the app, you'll see people every day posting their daily T plans. And it's our most simple way of helping people to intelligently self-watch and intelligently plan to make the next 24 hours a bit easier. So 3 questions to consider. The first one is, how well did I do my best to be my best and achieve my goals yesterday? Out of 10. 10 would mean I was perfect. 1 would mean I failed. Give yourself a score. 2 is you pick a tiny empowering action. That's the T. Could be, which is designed to help you to do a little bit better today. So if I got a 7 out of 10 yesterday, what can I do today to make my life a little bit easier? Go for a 5-minute walk at lunchtime would be an example. Only check my knees once today. Write an end of day reflection, positive reflection, helpful reflection. So just pick one of those things. And then number 3, you say why. Why is doing that going to be helpful for me? So that sounds really simple, but in fact, it wasn't very simple to put together. And there's been lots of different iterations, as we talked about a few podcasts ago, about how we got to the T plan. And 3-to-1 reflection then is something you can use at the end of the day. It's our most basic, what we call focus reflection tool. We know the power of writing to deal with and manage stress and unwanted thoughts. So the idea is that you write 3 helpful or positive things about the day, and then the one thing is something you can do better in the next 24 hours. So it might be, I need to be in bed 10 minutes earlier tonight than I was last night. You can go much further with that tool. So what I actually write down as many positive and helpful things as I can about the day. But I also post a 3-to-1 in the app, as do many other people. So yeah, I use those to bookend my day, and lots of other habit mechanics do as well.
Yeah, and chapter 5 is where you can find more about the daily 3-to-1 reflection, as you say, Jon. Now we're talking about planning tools. People will make plans, big plans, hopefully to succeed and be better. And a tool that the habit mechanic provides to do this in an excellent, practical and applicable way is the FAM story. FAM stands for something, doesn't it, Jon?
Future, ambitious, meaningful. Yeah, so one of the first really interesting ideas I came across in performance psychology was BHAGs, which is an idea from a book called Good to Great. And then there's another book called Built to Last, which is by some Harvard or Stanford academics. I'm not doing them great justice on, I can't remember what they're called, but very, very famous business book. And they talk about BHAGs, which is big, hairy, audacious goals, which I think is a really interesting term, but actually it's a bit frightening for some people. So we took inspiration from that idea of BHAGs, and we thought, what's a better way to explain this idea of the importance of goal setting and intelligent goal setting. And we wanted to go much further than just creating a big vision, which is what BHAGs are about. We wanted to give people a tool that they could use to structure their distant future and connect it with their medium-term future and their short-term future. So the fan form, which is in chapter 16, which is, I think, was the first podcast that we released of the year, maybe on January the 1st, 2023, was all about the FAM story and how to do it. It's in chapter 16 of the book. You'll be able to do it in the app very soon, so you can save and update your story. so powerful. So even if you just create the fam story, use some of the habit metric tools that we've talked about, like the in-depth reflection and the helpful habits reflection, and you start to do a 3-to-1 or a daily tea plan and a 3-to-1, just using those 4 or 5 tools, you're off to a fantastic start in terms of building better habits. So that's the fam story.
Yeah, and just one more thing I think I'd say about that, this idea of it almost takes the thinking away, is my way of putting it, John. I don't know if that's right, but this idea of helping you understand what you need to do in the immediate short term to help you make progress and reach your broader future aim, it spells it out for you.
Yes, and that's what I hope all these tools do. For me, they're like stabilizers. So it's like helping you to learn how to ride your bike of happiness and performance and success. And at some point, you'll start to habitualize this way of thinking. But then you might stop thinking in this way for a period because of what happened in your life. And you've got the reassurance that the tools are always there to put back on the bike if you want to restabilize and to re-practice. So nothing in the habit mechanic is prescriptive. The frameworks are there as a starting point so that you can get going on your journey to being a habit mechanic. But you don't have to do anything that isn't working for you ultimately. The key is to test and try, and then you're going to learn what works best for you.
Yeah, I think we could talk for much longer about all the terms and the planning tools, but I think it's probably appropriate to just pick out 2 more, and one which I don't think I could leave this specific podcast without asking you about, the habit building plan. The book is The Habit Mechanic, and this is the essence of it, really.
Yeah, for me, the habit building plan is the new gold standard of coaching yourself, of coaching others. I was speaking, I was delivering a keynote last week, and I said something in a way that I don't think I've ever said before. Said it quite in that way before, and I was also writing a Forbes article about this. And it's that I think that coaches, well, individuals, coaches, leaders, managers, we've had our hands tied behind our backs, literally, when we're trying to be our best or trying to help others to be at their best. And we've been seriously let down by the experts. We've taken in good faith training, insights, tools that we've been told, if you use these tools, if you use these systems, from the psychometrics to everything else, you're going to get fantastic results for yourself and for your people. But they've failed us. More people than ever are struggling, and it's not looking bright out there. It looks like more and more people are struggling. It's not because many of them are trying to do things differently. The reason that those other approaches are not working is because they don't actually move us past knowing what we should do. We don't do what we know we should do. We do what we're in the habit of doing. And that's why every core section in the book, why every coaching session that I do, why every coaching session that we train certified habit mechanic coaches to do, it ends with a habit building plan. Because if we want to change our behavior, we need to use insights from neuroscience, behavioral science, in combination with what I call habit science, to actually focus us onto what we're going to practice differently and how we're going to do that. So after investing thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours into creating our 9 action factor comprehensive behavioral science model, which I've spoken about in other recent podcasts and is in chapter 18 of the book, we thought, well, how can we make this super easy for people to actually activate these factors, even if they're just sitting in a room working by themselves? And that's what the habit building plan is. It implicitly taps into the 9 action factors. So you don't have to know anything about the 9 action factors, but you can still start to get better at activating them by answering the questions in the habit building plan. Of course, working with an expert to do that makes it easier. But in the book, we give lots of examples of similar habit building plans to the ones that you might want to build. And we have examples in there for sleep, diet and exercise, which are all closely interconnected, for managing stress, for building confidence, for performing under pressure, for being more productive, focused, etc. And then some leadership ones as well. So that's the habit building plan, Andrew. Absolutely essential if you want to do things differently and not just know things. And for me, that is the gold standard of what a good coaching session should look like. It should finish with a habit building plan based on the 9 factors that actually drive what you do.
Yeah. And chapter 20 is where you can read much more about that in the Habit Mechanic book. Final term then, Jon, in terms of the tools for planning to be your best. You mentioned this in passing earlier, but if you would give us your detailed insight into it, the willpower story.
Yeah, so the willpower story, the book is very deliberately structured. So it starts by introducing the main habit mechanic type concepts, and then it goes on to talk about your brain, and then we introduce the core tools. We start with sleep. Some people will come to me and say, I just want to be more productive and focused. How do I do that? And when you dig into it, they're not sleeping properly, they're not eating properly, they're not exercising properly. If your brain's not working well, you're not going to be more focused and more productive and feel good about yourself. Equally, if you're not managing stress very well, it's the same. Equally, if you're not managing your confidence very well, it's the same. So productivity and focus come at the end of the habit mechanic toolkit section of the book, because actually to optimize every 24-hour period, then you need to be sleeping well, eating properly, exercising properly, managing stress well, managing your confidence well. It's almost like the productivity piece is the icing on the cake. But a really powerful tool that we use to pull all these core ideas together is the willpower story. We know the power of planning ahead, intelligent planning, and the willpower story makes it easier for you to use insights like your activation level, optimization points throughout the course of the day. So there's a tool in chapter 21 called Optimal Activation Review. Helps you to plan those insights into your day. Helps you to plan or take into consideration your brain states and how you use and optimize how you use those during the course of the day. The ice cubes and ice sculptures idea that I mentioned earlier in the podcast, it helps you to plan how you're going to use those during the day. So yeah, the willpower story is a massive tool. And if you go into the app, most days you will see that my T plan is to create a willpower story. Because for me, that's the most beneficial, 5 minutes I can spend in my day. It's actually there. Sneak peek on the video. That's my willpower story today. But in chapter 25, there's loads of examples. There's the template, etc., to make it really easy for you to do that. So that's the willpower story.
Yeah, and as you illustrated there, Jon, all these terms, the core language, the tools for self-reflection and the tools for planning, they fit together and work with each other and support each other. That's, of course, a fantastic feature and benefit of the Habit Mechanic book and the system that you outline in it. Well, Jon, thanks so much for taking us through then chapter 3 in that depth, the Habit Mechanic language and tools. I'm sure that will help people who haven't read the book to understand more about how they can start to think about doing better and feeling better. And people who do already have the book, it's a great insight for them to really bring that to life even more. So thank you very much for that. We're going to finish the podcast with talking about two things which Well, one recent event, I know we'll come to that in a moment. You've been speaking, as you mentioned, a keynote. I think it was at St George's Park, the home of the Football Association, alongside a former Premier League manager and an Olympic gold medalist. So I'd love to hear more about that. But also, I think it was worth mentioning just something about chapter 27 of the book, the chief habit mechanic language and tools. We've talked about the habit mechanic language and tools, and now we'll just go on briefly, if we may, to talk about the chief habit mechanic language and tools. These are tools for leaders, if you like, and people who want to help others do better and feel better.
Yeah, so the book is split into two, if you like. The first part focuses on helping you to become a habit mechanic. The second part focuses on helping you to become a chief habit mechanic so you can help others to be at their best. That's quite unusual in a book. Why have you not written two separate books? Because for me, those two things are fundamentally interconnected. You can't become a fantastic leader if you're not a habit mechanic. So, yeah, we could have easily, I mean, the habit mechanic in truth is probably 4 separate books. That's how much is in there. But we wanted to create the manual, so you had it all in one place. And the chief habit mechanic piece isn't just for, titled leaders in big organizations or in sport or, the places that you might associate with leadership. It's for parents, it's for teachers, it's for anybody that wants to help others to do better. Because ultimately the most powerful way you can help others to do better is to help them to build better habits, because that's what runs them. And again, helping them to know some stuff and giving them some tips and some tricks might be nice, but it's a waste of time and can actually do more damage than good, because people hear a tip or a trick and maybe try it or think they've tried it, and then it doesn't work for them and they fail. And then they start to think, well, I tried to do better, but I can't. So this must just be the way that I am, and I'll never be able to change, and I'll never be any good. So all of a sudden, you've actually helped them to create more of a fixed, what I'd call eight-brain mindset, than help them to be their best. So the habit mechanic book includes our entire leadership program. So that if you want to become a better leader, better manager, or you want to help others to do that, or you just want to help others do better, then it's full of tools and insights that will help you to do that. And we'll go into some of the specific ones now.
Yeah, we'll look at some of those. But before we do, I'd just like to ask you that this chapter does contain a fascinating story which relates to the All Blacks rugby team. Now, whether you follow sport or not, whether you follow rugby union or rugby league, I'm sure everyone's heard of the All Blacks, the New Zealand international team. A fantastic winning record, almost unbeatable. The epitome of a successful team. And their coach, well, their then coach, Steve Hansen, you tell a story about him in this book, which you observed from the Amazon documentary on the team, which was a fly on the wall, fully candid look at their inner workings.
Yes. So I think the book has over 40 of these types of stories where we use these real world case studies, either with people we've worked with ourselves or people that are in the public eye. And we've managed to get some really good insight via books or documentaries and things. Yeah, the All Blacks are renowned for being one of the, well, often they're called the most successful sports team of all time. And this documentary was done in a period where they were making a transition. A lot of experienced players had retired essentially, and then newer players were having to come in to take up the leadership reins. And it's essentially shows a team meeting, or the clip I talk about shows a team meeting where Steve Hansen, where the All Blacks, I think they just lost to Australia, which is never good. Doesn't go down very well in New Zealand. And I think they were preparing to play Argentina in the Tri Nations competition. And he said, I want you to stand up if you've done your video preparation work for the game on Saturday, which they were tasked with watching core clips about their opposite numbers to learn more about them before they played them. And I think of a squad of maybe 25, about 5 stood up, if that, which was obviously hugely disappointing. And Steve Hansen's talking, then goes on to say, it's not about playing on the Saturday, it's about your habits in the week. He uses that language very, very specifically. It's about your habits. And what I found really interesting about that is, so for me, I think that everyone has some sense, I think, of what sports science has done for the physical conditioning of athletes over the past 20 years. What I think is going to happen is that habit science is going to have the same seismic impact, but on our ability to be healthy, happy, and at our best more often, individually, across teams, across organisations. And I think the habit mechanic approach is on the absolute razor sharp cutting edge of that. Because what's striking is that Steve Hansen, as massively experienced coach as he is, he's been let down by the experts because he could get the new players that were coming into the environment physically fit and physically conditioned, because the scientists and the practitioners were able to help him to do that. What he couldn't do was get them to adopt the habits he needed them to adopt in order to be the best All Blacks that they could possibly be, because the scientists and the practitioners weren't able to provide him with the answers. Whereas now I think we're in a much better position to do that. So yeah, that's the All Black story. I don't know if I got to the heart of what you wanted me to get out there, Andrew, but
yeah, I think just one thing I picked out about the way you relay the story was that I think you picked out a quote that after that pivotal moment where he helped the squad reflect and revealed to themselves and to their peers that they weren't perhaps as working as diligently as they might be. I think he talks about that moment and said something along the lines of, I think if you think you've arrived, then it'll probably be the end of the road, i.e. don't stop working on yourself.
yes, I think that's from a separate, I think that's from an interview before New Zealand played Ireland, I think. But yeah, it's from a similar time period. But yeah, it speaks to the point that Steve Hansen desperately wants, and the All Blacks pride themselves on creating a culture where everybody is working on themselves and everybody is striving to get better. But clearly in that moment, many of the players weren't. And that's because the 9 action factors were not aligned to help them to do that. But we haven't understood that before. Now we do, and the habit mechanic, I believe, is going to make it easier for people to build cultures that make it easier for people to be at their best.
Yeah, well, you said a word there that is included in and connects to what I'm going to ask you about next, culture. I think the most important term that's defined and set out in this chapter about the chief habit mechanic language and tools is the 5-stage team power model. Please do tell us about that, John, if you would.
Yeah, and the good news is we just released a webinar that we're going to do on March 21st about the 5-stage team power model, but it's in the book as well. Yeah, so again, having worked in professional sport for a long time, having done an undergraduate in sports science, a master's in sports psychology, you think, well, how do teams actually work? What makes a good team? And you have these black box outdated models like the Belbin model, etc. And I just couldn't find a model that really I thought was really, really effective in explaining how high performing teams work, that had a good neurobiological basis, that had a good neuroscience basis, that really thought about habits. So I created the 5-stage team power model. I used insights from academic theories, from brain science, from behavioral science, but also a lot of the work that I'd done with some, top elite world leading sports coaches that I've been lucky to work with, using insights that I gleaned from them. And I put it together in this model that's really powerful and really robust. And literally within 5 minutes, you can assess your team. And then the next 5 minutes, you can get your team to assess themselves. So really simple, really practical, build on all the ideas from the habit mechanic. And it gets you thinking about what are the habits in the team and which habits are helping us to be at our best. What do we need to change? And then it plugs into our leadership framework as well, which is powerful.
Yeah, and within that 5-stage model, Jon, I mean, you show you connect this to a visual device, which I think is exceptionally useful and makes the thinking easier and more applicable. The idea of climbing up a mountain. Just if you would give us some detail about those 5 stages and the scaling of the summit, to use the metaphor.
Yeah, so the first stage, which is before base camp, is what we call me power conditioning. We talked about language right at the start of the podcast. If you're going to have a powerful team, everyone in the team needs to be deliberately working towards being at their best, needs to be proactively being a habit mechanic. So that's the first thing we need to consider. The next stage, and actually we go a bit further with the metaphor. We actually imagine that we know the complexities of the VUCA world and the post-pandemic world. We used to have that metaphor that was about getting the right people on the bus. We dispel that metaphor because it's outdated. That assumes that you know where you're going now and the road is clear. It's not anymore. Things are changing so quickly. It also assumes that there's a dominant leader in the team, or that leadership is disproportionately, but actually, no, let me scrap what I said, that it assumes there's a leader on the bus and everybody else are passengers. Well, that isn't the case. So the metaphor we use is that imagine that actually your team are on snowmobiles going up the mountain, often in quite challenging conditions. So that's what we're starting. So the second stage is base camp, where we meet up and we park our snowmobile somewhere outside the building. We go in and we work out what are we trying to achieve here? What are the big goals? What's the mission? What does the top of the mountain look like? And we distill that down into roles and responsibilities. And we try to do that in as a self-determining way as we can. And this really connects into the cultural architect part of our leadership model, which we'll talk briefly about later. So we set out the vision, people buy into and are empowered to buy into their roles and responsibilities. Then we get on our snowmobiles and we set off. So that, and the third stage is called group climbing support. This is how we communicate with each other day in and day out to help each other to be at our best. This plugs into 2 other areas of the leadership model, which is the role model and the action communicator. Step 4 is what we call campfire discussions. So this is highlighting the importance of that need to develop each other and doing that very deliberately. So carving out some time to coach and mentor each other so that we can all continue to learn the essential skills and habits that we're going to need as we tweak and refine what our team needs to do in order to win and beat the competition in the challenging modern world. That plugs into something we call the swap coach, which is another part of our leadership model. And then stage 5 is called the group climbing review, where we periodically stop, get together and review the goals and the mission that we set out in the community base camp and question, is this still the mission? What's changed? What do we need to adjust? What are we doing well? What can we do differently, etc. So they're the 5 stages, and you can essentially assess yourself collectively and individually across the stages. And then you've got the leadership framework to actually help you to work on the different areas.
Yeah, and that metaphor of the mountain is so useful and so applicable, it seems to me, and the idea of climbing it together fits perfectly. I think to draw to a close this look at the language and tools in chapter 27 relating to the being a chief habit mechanic. Just one more thing then, Jon, and you've just mentioned it's one of the four, the idea of a cultural architect. This to me is really fascinating.
Yeah, so I think it's worth saying that we have a leadership model, habit science-backed leadership model. That's four areas. One is the role model, one is the action communicator, one is the swap coach, one is the cultural architect. Like the habit assessments or the habit metrics that we highlighted earlier in the podcast for us individually, like the helpful habits reflection and the in-depth habit reflection, we have habit metrics for each four of those leadership areas there in the book. So you can analyze your habits in all those areas, identify some of your destructive habits, if you have any, and then also start to highlight your super habits. The cultural architect, we're not going to need everyone to be a cultural architect in the team. You've got maybe one or two people who are in charge of that. We do need everyone to be better role models and better action communicators. And that's my point about everyone's got a leadership responsibility in a team because everyone has influence. But the cultural architect is about stepping back and being responsible for creating what we call a purposeful development culture, which is a culture that makes it really easy for people to turn up every day and to work towards being at their best and building better habits and just getting a little bit better. And we have a strategy tool this is in chapter 32, which is the cultural architect chapter, that's similar in a lot of ways to the FAM story tool. The FAM story tool is for yourself, but the strategy tool is for your team. And it's got 5 core questions. The first one is what does winning look like for the team? And the final question is all about, well, what habits do our people actually need in order to achieve those outcomes? So yeah, that's the cultural architect. That's a lot of the work that I do with clients, helping them to become better cultural architects. And culture is a word we hear bandied around a lot. I'm not always sure it's used in a way that really reflects what it's about. For me, cultures, the basic unit of a culture is a habit, and the term culture comes from the Latin word cultivate, and this idea of a farmer cultivating the crops and the land. So as a cultural architect, you're trying to create your environment, think of it as your field, and create the right conditions that make it as easy as possible for your people to develop and sustain really helpful habits that are going to help them to be at their best, the team to be at its best, and the organization to be at its best.
Yeah, and as you say, Jon, not only is that covered, of course, in the Habit Mechanic book, but you do have a forthcoming webinar, how coaches and leaders can supercharge team performance using a new science-based 5-step framework. And that framework is what we've just been talking about. So well worth considering that webinar too. Well, thanks for your time today, Jon. We'd just like to conclude the podcast by asking you about a recent speaking engagement you had. It was, as I understand it, the first time you delivered a new keynote. You did it at St. George's Park, the home of the FA, and you were speaking alongside 2 very, very high-profile sporting figures. Please do tell us more.
Yes, so I was speaking to leaders in the golf industry from throughout the UK and Europe, and helping them to reflect on the idea that habits are driving their organizations, they're driving them, they're driving the individuals, and just showing them some simple and practical ways they can use to start understanding their habits better, their team's habits better, and then to start building better habits. everyone in the room actually got the book, which was really great. And that's part of our new approach to our keynotes. Everyone got access to the app as well, so that people didn't just leave the learning in the room, they take it with them. And already I just got a message on LinkedIn just before this from someone's boss, very, very senior person, telling me how great the feedback was about my session. Someone that I don't know, they just randomly reached out to me. So yeah, I think that's the key in our keynotes, what we call Tougher Minds Talks, is that we don't only give people simple, practical, accessible, science-based insights that are entertaining and they'll leave people feeling good about themselves, but we also give people the toolkit they can take away with them and start immediately implementing in their own lives, but using to help others as well. So it's great to see the success that talk had, and the great feedback that we had, and that we're now actually offering a new range of keynotes called Tougher Minds Talks to organisations, to businesses that think it would be beneficial for their workforce. So if that's something people are interested in, do get in touch. We only have a limited number of slots, and we sent an email out about this a few days ago, and we've already got a lot of inquiries. So if you do want us to book us, do get in touch sooner rather than later. So yeah, it was really great, and it was also really fascinating actually Tim Foster, who won an Olympic gold medal, he talked about his team and the things that they did to perform well.
He was a rower, wasn't he, as I understand it, John?
He was a rower, very high profile, because he won a gold medal for GB when we didn't win many gold medals. So, and he did it. He was in the same crew as Steve Redgrave, who's one of the greatest Olympians of all time. But yeah, so he was showing the things that they did in their team, and you could completely connect that to the 5-stage team power model. But it was also interesting to listen to Steve Bruce, very seasoned football manager, and listen to, I suppose, some of the challenges he was sharing in trying to get players to change their behaviour. And one story he gave was about his last job, I think it was at West Brom, where they wanted the players to stop using their mobile phones. So they agreed that if a player used his mobile phone, in a team space, could be in the rehab room or team meeting or whatever, they'd immediately be fined £1,000. But he said within 5 minutes of us setting the rule, we already had 8,000 in the kitty, because people just willfully decided that they'd rather pay £1,000, and use their phone. But for me, it's an interesting reward and penalty. So reward and penalty system is one of the 9 action factors. Clearly, that penalty system wasn't enough. So you can if you'd have said it's going to be £10,000, that's a different conversation, isn't it? For example, but it comes back to the point: if we know what the 9 action factors are, we can tweak and refine them, and that's the role of a cultural architect. And again, we talked about the habit building plan before. We have a similar tool in the leadership section of the book that's focused on culture and helping you to understand how the 9 action factors are influencing what your people are getting good at, for better or for worse. But yeah, Tougher Minds Talks. If you want to book one, get in touch. We'd love to have a conversation. We've been doing this a long time now, and I think that with our book and with our app, we can give you something unique, not just on the day, but also that toolkit that doesn't just people don't just leave the room saying that was great and then never do anything. They've actually got the tools to carry on making positive changes for themselves, their teams, and the organisation, and in their personal lives as well.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's been great to talk today, and thanks for sharing that story. I'm sure Steve Bruce has probably seen the the figure that the fine really bites increase over the years as the Premier League's become more successful. But that's definitely a different subject for a different podcast. Again, thanks for talking to us, Jon. Worth pointing out that anyone who wants to contact us can do so via the website tougherminds.co.uk. If you want to find out more about the new Tougher Minds talks, the new keynotes, tougherminds.co.uk is the place to make contact. You can also sign up to receive information about Tougher Minds services, and link, of course, to download the Habit Mechanic University app via the App Store or Google Play, and of course a link to get your copy of the Habit Mechanic book. And please don't forget to like, subscribe and review this podcast on the platform of your choice. Jon, again, thanks for your time. Anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Thanks again for listening. If you've got the book, read it. If you've already read it, read it again. If you're in the app, check out people's T plans and 3-to-1 reflections, like, comment, post your version of a T plan and a 3-to-1. You know, the more that we engage and support each other in the app, the more we're helping others to be at their best, and that's a great way to help yourself to be at your best as well. So remember, this is a journey. There's no magic, but I firmly believe that we're using the best science and the best toolkit to help us to be at our best. So keep persisting, and remember, you're only ever one habit away.
Thanks for listening. Remember, if you want to get your business off to a great start in January, get in touch to discuss how our Habit Mechanic keynotes or workshops can equip your people with practical skills that help them build super habits in 5 minutes. Or if you want to earn $100,000 a year working part-time by launching your own coaching business, we guarantee to help you do that in just 13 hours. Get in touch with us today to learn more about becoming a certified habit mechanic coach who can transform people's lives and is recognized as a world leader in the field. For more details, contact us via the website. The link is in the podcast notes. Or if you want to feel better and do better every day, download the Habit Mechanic University app from your app store. Thanks again for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Habit Mechanic podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe and tell someone else about one of the ideas or insights that you found most interesting.